Welcome again to another session of Israel Ehad. Today we're going to be covering another subject on the lunar Sabbath, on the Creator's calendar. We're going to be taking it from an angle from the book of Joshua. And today we're going to be looking at a subject which appears to be very contradictory. It's 7 days march around Jericho. Now, many people that observe the seventh day Sabbath according to the weekly cycle, which always falls on a Saturday on the Gregorian calendar, say that, from the very beginning of creation to today, the Sabbath has cycled without interruption, always falling on a Saturday. But clearly, today we're going to look at a subject in Joshua chapter 6, which contradicts this, because as we look at this subject, we all know the story, or most of us who are familiar with the Bible and the Old Testament know that Father Elohim commanded Joshua and the priests and the men of valor, men of war, to go on the offensive and to march around the city of Jericho 6 times, once for 6 days. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times. Now, how can this be? If you keep a 7th day Sabbath, one of those days has to be a Sabbath day. Now, this contradicts clearly what Father Yehovah says in various places of the scriptures, that the children of Israel were to abide in their place on the Sabbath day. Now we can clearly see this before going into a little bit of the story in Joshua chapter 6. May our Heavenly Father bless us and keep us as we look into His scriptures. May the Ruach HaKodesh enlighten us to accept and to understand. May our eyes be opened, may our ears be opened, that we won't let any foul spirits or familiar spirits block any guidance or pleadings from the Ruach HaKodesh as we look at these scriptures. So if we look at Exodus chapter 17, we can clearly see here that going on the offensive, a battle offensive, I mean, this is totally contradictory. Father just wouldn't do this. In Exodus chapter 16, verse 23, it says here, and he said unto them, This is that which Yehovah hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto Yehovah. Bake that which you will bake today, and seethe that which you will seethe. That and that which remaineth over lay out for you to be kept until the morning. We clearly see here that in this verse that even cooking had to be done the previous day before the Sabbath. People were there. They knew they have to stay in their place. They wouldn't be attacking anybody or doing anything militarily. And clearly see this in read verse 28 and 29 of Exodus 16. And Yehovah said unto Moshe, How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for that Yehovah hath given you the Sabbath. Therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide or stay every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So we clearly see here that no travel, no excursions. Yehovah wanted his people to stay and worship him on that day. It's a worship day, it's a rest day, it's a Shabbat, it's a Sabbath. And to tell Joshua, if we go back to Joshua chapter 6, to tell Joshua to get all the soldiers ready battle-hardened soldiers, all dressed up, to go on the offensive on the Shabbat. It just doesn't add up. Now you might be saying, oh, they were doing God's work on the Sabbath, but I can understand that. But offensively, you don't go on a military offensive on the Sabbath, and it just doesn't make sense. There is an answer to it, which we're going to be looking at in a little while. I just want to cover Joshua chapter 6 for those of you that are not too familiar with Joshua chapter 6, and I'm just going to be reading. It says there, now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. Joshua chapter 6 verse 1. And none went out and none came in. And Jehovah said unto Joshua, see, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valour. Ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And the 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. So what we see here, eventually on the 7th day, they went round 7 times. They blew their trumpets, everybody shouted, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Now, is there any ancient writings which indicate to us that, there was a different method which the children of Israel kept? There is. I'm going to be reading from a book called the Book of Jasher. Now, this is not in the canon, the Old Testament canon books, but in fact it is actually quoted in the Old Testament. I'm going to read from Joshua. In fact, it's actually quoted in the book of Joshua, and it's chapter 10 of Joshua and verse 13. And it says there, and the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? So we see the clear here that the book of Jasher is mentioned in Scripture, and in fact it is actually mentioned in the book of Samuel as well. I don't know if I can find the actual quote in the book of Samuel. I'll try, but I won't linger too long in there. But I'll try and find it another time. But as I go to the book of Jasher, I'm going to be reading here. So the book of Jasher, chapter 88. And it's under the heading, Joshua leads Israel across Jordan after keeping the Passover, and they set out to take Jericho. The conquest of Canaan begins. So in verse 14 of Joshua Jasher 88, verse 14, it clearly says there, and it was in the 2nd month, on the 1st day of the month, that Yahweh said to Joshua, rise up, behold, I've given Jericho into your hand, with all the people thereof. And all your fighting men shall go around the city once each day. Thus shall you do for 6 days. So clearly here, this was fighting men. This is an offensive. Jericho had not attacked the children of Israel. There is also evidence in the book of Maccabees that clearly tells you that when in the time of the Maccabees, when the Syrians were persecuting Israel, they would not fight. Initially, they would not fight against the Syrians. And many Israelites were killed because the Syrians attacked them on the Sabbath, and they would not fight them, and they just lay there and were just slaughtered, until the Maccabees later instituted that if you were attacked on the Sabbath, you could defend yourself. So here we can clearly see that by Father telling the Israelites to attack on the Sabbath, this on one of those 7 days, this clearly could not have been a Sabbath. So we're going to have a look at the concept now of how this fits around the lunar Sabbath. We looked at in one of the previous videos how the priests were confined in the tabernacle for 7 days, and we saw how that on the 8th day they came out and had the tabernacle service, and the Shekinah glory was revealed to the people of Israel, and God accepted their worship. We saw that in Exodus 40 that began on the first day of the month, exactly what Joshua is book of Yasha is revealing here today. It tells you that this conquest began on the first day of the month. Now, the concept of the lunar Sabbath is that the new moon day, which is the first day of the month, is not counted in the weekly counts. So what in the concept of the lunar solar calendar, according to, if you look at the verse in Ezekiel chapter 46, it clearly gives you 3 categories of days there: new moons, work days, and Sabbaths. So your new moon day is not counted in your cycle of 6 work days and then the Sabbath. It's a completely separate worship day where all the children of Israel would come and worship Yahovah. The new cycle would begin with this day. Unless you had the new moon coming in, you would not know how to keep the Sabbath. This is the concept which Yahovah Father wanted us to know and observe the Sabbath. This is why in Isaiah chapter 66 it says there, from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me. The new moons were always closely associated with the Sabbaths, because unless the new moon came in, you wouldn't know when to keep the Sabbath. So going back to the book of Jasher here, we clearly see that it was on the first day of the 2nd month that Yahovah commanded the children of Israel, or the men of war and the priests, to begin their march. And this clearly shows you that there was no Sabbath day involved here. If you're keeping a lunar Sabbath and you begin your march on New Moon Day, you would cover, New Moon Day is day 1. Then you would have 6 working days. So New Moon Day, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That covers 7 days without actually going into a Sabbath. The 8th day of the month is your first Sabbath, because the beauty of the lunar Sabbath is that each Sabbath falls on exactly the same day every month, on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th days of the month. So therefore, the first day of the month is always a new moon day. Therefore, you can clearly see that Yahovah didn't break his own laws. The children of Israel didn't go out on a Sabbath day to fight or to march or to go out of their place, because they began their march on a new moon day, which is marching, or travel is permissible on a new moon day. It is permissible to do various things on a new moon day which you're not allowed, or it's not permissible on a Sabbath day. So through this we can clearly see the beauty of the lunar Sabbath, because it enabled the children of Israel the priests and the men of war to do what Father had commanded them without breaking the Sabbath day. So we can clearly see that. And so this is just a short video now, and I hope this has been enlightening. And if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. May Yahweh bless you and keep you, and bye bye for now.